Malevolent is a horror podcast and may contain content not suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This season gets an extra content warning because I dug up some lore even people who've only watched the podcast might not know of. So on top of everything else that happens in this season, if you don't want to hear about implied non-con cousin kissing and PDF files, you should avoid the season with a billionaire, probably.
The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep.
Coda is the first of 4 between-season episodes that are named after very ironic musical terms. While a coda can be defined as just the end of a musical piece, I find its usage in Del Signo al Coda more relevant. Ain't no way. I'm leaving this part in. From what I understand about music, which admittedly is not that much yet, Del Signo al Coda means from the sign to the coda, and it shows the musician what part of the piece to repeat. I don't know, I just thought the going back and repeating again part was the ironic bit. Do you see where I'm going with this? Whatever the case may be, Arthur's indomitable human spirit has managed to drag him to a cabin where, despite the multiple problems he has managed to light a fire and not bleed out. But don't you go getting too relaxed now. A certain shark can smell the blood in the water. Kayne, the man himself, offers Arthur a deal, which I'm sure is a great sign from some motherfucker named Kayne. He'll put John back, without any of his memories of humanity. With 3 seconds flat to decide and Arthur just missing him so much, he agrees to it. Which was his first mistake.
Hello? Is anyone there?
Don't you remember?
Yeah, half a minute later they're going at each other's throats. Well, at least we know nothing has changed. After bullying new John, who he's named Yellow, into submission and calling him a good boy, they head out into the snow, find a D&D tavern. Arthur gets emphatically plastered, rents a room, and cries himself to sleep, while Yellow vehemently bitches about how disgusting humans are. Girl, same. I like this guy. Not more than John. But enough. In the morning, Art gets himself cleaned up, but he does not distinctly say he cuts the hair. And Yellow observes someone going through their room, but who cares? They pass the threshold of the front door and are immediately accosted by a monster. And Arthur comes to in a bed. 2 sleeps in a real human bed back to back? This is gonna suck. A kindly young southern gentleman introduces himself as Andrew Larson, descendant of Wallace Larson, who founded this town in 1851 as a mining company. Personally, that was my red flag number 4, right after the dulcet tones of women screaming in his basement. And Arthur, God bless his soul, does not trust a single word he says in spite of his smooth, gentrified, trustworthy accent. Which was red flag number 1, by the way. While Yellow is complaining about why Arthur doesn't trust the millionaire coal tycoon who effectively kidnapped them, Arthur discovers his gun is in fact not in his bag anymore. Which he expected. They wander the estate, but are quickly whacked by the guy who was searching their room, which is Jack Larson, by the way, also Uncle. And it was around this time, I think, that I started suspecting that Yellow and John were 2 entirely different beings. For one thing, Yellow panics so much more hilariously than John ever did. John's primary coping mechanism to terror is to describe things in even more vivid detail, while Yellow's is to just scream, "Oh my god, what the fuck," over and over again. Second of all, they have 2 very different aspects of humanity that they warm up to. John, especially later on, finds his comfort in humanity in the loving aspect of it. The way humans interact and care for each other is fascinating, and he also starts really liking things like poetry. He finds real value in all forms of life and human interaction. Unless you're Oscar. If I had to guess why, it's probably because he spent 10 years in the dark world without any sort of positive interaction whatsoever. Meanwhile, Yellow, his other half, if you hadn't guessed, was tearing his way through Earth, and 2 unfortunates in particular, to try and find his missing piece. Oh yeah, scratch that. I fucking hate this guy. No, the part of humanity that Yellow finds himself liking is self-expression. He thinks hope is stupid, which I'm sure he got from... Don't crash out. Don't do it. Not yet. Just 1 more season. Yellow enjoyed when they were in the tavern and there was music and dancing. Watching people move without reason, he says, was interesting. Which I suppose does make the most sense because the king does have dancers in Carcosa. And which I also suppose would have been pretty cute if he didn't torture people. Yes, I know John tortured people too, but, you know, technically, that was only 1 person. And it wasn't Charlie, so. Anyway, when our boys wake up tied to a chair, Arthur has a crisis of conscience and decides to tell Yellow and the viewer what really happened to Michael Faust. Almost a month into the prison pits, the guards threw in a man who called himself Faust. Arthur, bless his paranoid heart, knew it was a test, but didn't know what kind it was until he realized they were no longer being fed. And what they were being fed the last few times they were fed had been raw meat. There is no easy, tactful, or advertiser-friendly way to describe what exactly Arthur did to Mr. Faust, but you're smart. You can infer. I just like to remind you, we learned in season 1 that every time Art touches a corpse, John relives how they die instantaneously, over and over, until Art stops touching them. Now this wasn't entirely unprovoked, as John's said ability is how we know the lock of human hair around Faust's neck was from someone who met a similar fate. Which, we will soon discover, did not do well for John's mental health. Eesh. Since leaving the pits, Arthur's nightmares of Faroe have been replaced with nightmares of Faust, and it was something he felt he needed to get off his chest, before they probably die in a couple minutes. Yellow is disturbed, which is freaking rich coming from the one who put Faust there in the first place. With this exact outcome in mind, I might add. But he doesn't have that much time to throw a fit about it because, oh my god, Andrew Larson is Wallace Larson, who could have guessed? Where they are is Addison, the town he founded to become a mining operation, in 1851. The current year is about 1930, by the way. Addison was also the name of his young daughter. Emphasis on was. A long time ago, his 2 sons and his wife were taken from him in some unnamed tragedy, and he decided the most logical conclusion was to join the Order of the Fallen Star and sacrifice his youngest daughter Addison to the outer gods, presumably for immortality. Among other horrible, horrible things. About that, in Malevolent Face-Off, which is a trivia competition that Joe, Harlan, and Erica did, Harlan confirmed that it was, quote, heavily implied the invisible monster was a child of Addison and Larson, which, as if we needed more reasons to hate this guy. For this transgression, Arthur pinky promises to personally watch the life drain from his eyes. Meanwhile, Yellow listening to Larson lick the boots of the outer gods is making him really frustrated that he's not one anymore. And just when I almost forgot 58 existed. Anyway, Uncle takes a chunk out of Arthur's ear and Larson destroys Faroe's music box, which I'm sure will just do wonders in convincing Arthur not to kill him, and to really rub it in before they kill him by throwing him into the mines and feeding him to the giant invisible monster, Larson wants him to play them a song, which little did he know was the worst mistake he would ever make.
Whatever happens, I'll never forget you.
We are so back! Yes, with the power of love and sad montages and absolutely nothing else, John is back! And they're so very reserved and well-adjusted. I didn't miss you or anything. Kayne, I want to go home! No, of course not. Me neither. Oh, fuck off, Arthur. John used to say that. Arthur is pretty hell-bent on killing Larson, so he bypasses all the side quests and finds a way back up, leaving John in the unique position where he has to be the voice of reason and the heart at the same time. He tries and fails to talk Arthur down even with his poetic descriptions of scenery. How do you know so much about architecture now? And with getting a random prisoner of Larson's head blown off by asking too many questions about the Order. Weird. Anyway, after the most heart-wrenching, sad puppy dog John breakup of the season, Arthur stalks and kills Uncle in a similar fashion to Faust, although did not eat him this time. However, this was still not great for John, considering Arthur forced him to comply and mega projected himself onto Larson. Arthur says later on in season 4 that he sees himself and Larson as cut from the same cloth, and based on his breakdown in Bedrock, which is this episode, we can guess it's because of the parallel between Faroe and Addison, a little girl who trusted and relied on her father, and died because he failed her. This episode is so good. John recites him a nice poem, describes the dawn to him, they apologize to each other, arrange a dancing date, no I am not kidding, and raid Larson's pantry for a single apple. Fruit and human flesh, call that the Sun Wukong diet. Ayo. I thought John deserved to get Golder for Bedrock. It just feels right with the level of emotional intelligence he displayed, especially compared to Yellow in a similar situation. But it is clear that he took some aspect of humanity from this and Faust, just maybe not a positive one. To clear his conscience, Arthur agrees to do what John suggested they do in the first place. Go back down to the mines and rescue the other people that are imprisoned there. At the time they were down there, Arthur was back to seething about cultists because Larson sacrificed his daughter for a cult, and so he was in absolutely no mood to entertain John's suggestion that maybe they were people who were being held prisoner, even though he knew he was probably right. It's almost a little bit sweet that John has more compassion for cultists than Arthur does, considering he used to be the type of thing that was worshipped by cults. Somehow, even after spending just under 3 months in a prison pit where he was driven to madness far enough to eat a man, Arthur cannot fathom finding empathy for people who are in a situation technically because of their own doing. Perhaps because he finds it difficult to find empathy for himself. Or it's because his parents were cultists and his father-in-law was an evangelical who tried to convert him after Faroe died, which is a bad time to convert somebody. For the record, I don't think any time is a good time to convert somebody. But if there was a list of top 10 worst times to convert somebody, that would probably be number 1. Anyway, back in the mines they find a little fellow who's willing to pantomime them some exposition. The invisible monster is the the head of a hive mind every prisoner in the mines is attached to. They were once part of it too, but they managed to escape by using obsidian to cut the monster's influence out of the back of their head, which is where it lodges. They agree to help Arthur and John by leading them to more obsidian, which is the only thing that can cut the hive mind's influence out of their heads, but are quickly cut off by the monster, and Arthur is now 3 for 3 on near-fatal stab wounds. Arthur is briefly jacked into the hive mind, but John uses the hand he can control to cut them out, leaving Arthur open to use the flute that they found in Larson's study to see what it would do. See, the last thing that Yellow and Arthur heard when they were attacked by the monster was a flute, and when they were wandering around the Larson estate, they found a flute in his study. John and Arthur then had a running theory that the monster was controlled by the flute somehow, and thank God they were, or else Arthur would be just a little bit more dead right now. But John's not giving up that easily. Not after the things he did to get back to him.
Come on! Would you just fucking help?
Who, me?
Yes, you! You fucking...
No. I'm enjoying. Keep going. I'm good. Thank you.
So, John did not come straight back to Arthur after his sacrifice, as he so claimed, and we don't receive full context for what really happened until episode 55 of season 6, which is 5 episodes away from the end of the series. For clarity's sake, I will give you the story, but I will leave out that one big thing because there needs to be some suspense for you to come back and watch the next one. You're not ready for my opinions. I'm not ready for my opinions. When John rejoined the king to save Arthur, he and what is now Yellow fought for control of the body for an indeterminate amount of time. We don't know exactly how time dilation in the Dreamlands works, but thanks to Noel, we know that it does exist. So for the 2-ish days that Arthur was without John, John very well could have been without Arthur for anywhere from a couple of months to several years. And judging by the damage he did, potentially a lifetime. Whatever the case, Faust did a number on John at a time when he was just starting to really question who and what he even was anymore, and when he rejoined the king, he found himself unwilling to give up on his other half. Because of Lily. Because of Arthur. Because he couldn't abandon the love or humanity he had found, or the other half of his soul. But Yellow could. Calling John's reaction to being re-banished to the Dark World a crash out would be the understatement of the century. The culmination of the memory of the torture he endured from Faust, the death of Lily, the confusion of figuring out what he even is anymore while failing to save the 2 other halves that abandon him is all compounded by the very air he breathes in this hell, and he falls hard into the trance of the Dark World. His rage is so bright that it draws the thing that calls himself Kayne right to him, who wastes no time taking advantage of his newfound blindness. Kayne spends the next god knows how long playing John's mild case of separation anxiety like a fiddle, and John commits atrocities that he is so ashamed of he keeps it canned for the next 2.5 seasons. But one day, after one too many, he breaks.
I want to be good again.
Well, why didn't you just say so?
Kayne, perfectly fine with not listening to My Immortal on repeat for the next 500 years, agrees to send him back to Arthur under the condition he gets him to New York and the Order of the Fallen Star, without telling him why he wants them there. He also tacks on that he should probably just keep this whole Dark World thing a secret, period, because just what would Arthur think if he ever found out what he was doing here? Kayne's back with them now to remind him of their little agreement, and what a shame. If Arthur dies here, looks like it's back to the Dark World. Together this time. Well, toodles. Worth the note here that the color metaphor becomes literal in the Dark World. John says when he's in the Dark World, he's a shade of yellow that he's, quote, never seen before. For most Dark World segments, unless it's really important that we see his expression, I also omit his mask and make it so that he can turn in 3 dimensions, because he's not in Arthur's head anymore. He actually has a body. And you know, the part of him that connects him to Arthur and humanity most, his eyes and his mask being hidden under the guise of the King in Yellow, only to be revealed when he has a humanized emotion, and it still being a part of him in the first place, even in the body of Hastur, is just so symbolic and clever of me. Back to the land of the living, thanks to some questionable stitch work, they have the sweetest conversation of the whole season and bounce back to kill the bastard monster this time. Arthur, never one to pass up the opportunity to tempt fate and flip off God, reveals his plan as some good old-fashioned self-sacrifice, which John is not excited about. But in true suspense fashion, Arthur cuts off their conversation once they reach the prisoner cultists so the monster can't hear them through the hive mind. Once they cut the first person free, the monster notices immediately, so he gives them their obsidian, tells them to cut the others loose, and makes himself the distraction. Much to John's panic and chagrin. Poor John, if he ever does become human, he's gonna have a heart condition. Art is reattached to the hive mind, and the monster reveals it was just lonely. And Arthur's like, wrong podcast, fucker, peek this sick flute solo, and flutes so hard it straight up dies. And after more wholesome banter, they giggle off into the sunset in Larson's stolen car. Art is so ready to go home and keep looking for Anna Stanchik, but John has another suggestion.
Do you trust me?
What?
Do you trust me?
I trust you, John.
That is a dirty, dirty trick, John. I love you so much. But wait, there's more.
And into my garden stole, when the night had veiled the pole. In the morning glad I see my foe outstretched beneath the tree.
What was that?
Poetry.
What is it about?
Hatred, anger, and revenge.
Revenge.
Yes, revenge.
Well then, let us make him suffer.
Oh yeah, now we're fucking cooking. You may have noticed Yellow looks a little bit different with Larson than he did with Arthur. And that's because I wanted the fragment to reflect the host, specifically in the mask. I don't think I need to spell out for you the symbolism of a mask, but just to make it clear, the King in Yellow, I called it before 58, is just the cloak. His followers, those who have seen his sign, and most importantly those he speaks through, are the mask. Metaphorically speaking. More physically speaking, I imagine the mask was part of his kit in the first place so he could blend in with his followers. And you know, the symbolism of putting on other people's faces and voices in order to trick people, like with Adam Fry, we'll get to him later. Yellow, when I catch you. When I catch you, boy. Yellow's mask looked like John when he was with Arthur because he was a fragment of the King in Yellow that was with Arthur. With Larson, I thought it appropriate to get a bit more creative and use some of the monstrous influences children grandchildren have to make him look a little bit more, admittedly on the nose, evil. I was going to just give him Jack Larson's ram horns, but this is adorable. I settled for something simple so it wouldn't stray too far from the King's primary and symbolism. I would, however, like to remind you that the nuance is not lost because these horns are not innate. He got them when he got with Larson, which could possibly reflect Larson's attitudes about the outer gods being a certain way, or maybe even potentially how the horns are specifically features of his children, the people he traditionally did not treat very well and who he had a lot of influence over, into what they eventually became. Symbolism! Speaking of, you may have noticed that I only draw Yellow's face on his right, just like I only draw John's on his left. While Yellow was with Arthur, I needed him to be very distinct in a way that was more than just the colors, to prevent any sort of confusion from them looking almost exactly the same. Which cleanly segues us back into the time of what I was actually doing while I was listening to these episodes. After I binged all of season 2 in about 4 days, give or take, I decided I really wanted to learn how to draw these characters well. And I assure you it had absolutely nothing to do with the massive amounts of Jartharcopium I was consuming in order to make it through the last part of season 2 and the first part of season 3. It took me about until The Wager, which is the last part of season 5, before I really started using the cubism influences that you see in these videos for all the characters' faces. So before that I was focusing more on human anatomy in general because I didn't draw humans before this. But while I was getting frustrated figuring out the differences between Kayne and Arthur's face, I focused more on the King in Yellow and his 2 fragments. Deciding on the half a pallid mask thing was easy, but the part that I'm more proud of is the crowns. They didn't have a big enough impact on the design for me to bank on them for people being able to tell Yellow from John at first glance. But aside from John being the left while Yellow is the right, and John staying hunched over to see through Arthur's eyes while Yellow stands straighter with a more kingly perspective, it was one of their very first unique defining features. The King's crown has 8 prongs. Prongs? Sure. John has 4 with the middle one broken off at the top, and Yellow has 5 with the middle one broken off at the bottom. Now maybe I put way too much thought into this, or worse, the impact will diminish because I explain it so much, but the idea was that John having the base of the crown but not the top part makes him a more grounded version of the King in Yellow. Don't get me wrong, his primary coping mechanism is still pretty much murder. He still has the crown, therefore he is still the King in Yellow. But when it comes to being contrasted with Yellow, he finds it much more difficult later on in the season to, spoiler alert, project and use his power the same way he does. He's somewhat in denial about being a king and doesn't like using that influence. Yellow, on the other hand, will throw his weight around for any reason, including just to show off, even though it's killing his host. This, however, does come off as juvenile and unstable when he's in a situation where he doesn't have any real power, like when he was with Arthur for the first time. Which means even though he has more prongs and therefore likely more influence, he doesn't have the bottom part of his center prong because his frame of mind is not 100% stable or reliable, which unintentionally comes through in the shape of his cloak. By hunching over and metaphorically humbling himself to see through the eyes of a human, John ends up with a much wider and more stable base. Yellow, by contrast, tries to stand taller like their original body did, which might not quite make him look more unstable, but I think does make him look like a pale imitation of what he used to be, and maybe not as embracing of his new station as John is. Speaking of, the way I designed the king is a bit more personal. I don't know why, but the number one thing I really find quite disturbing is when things are just too long. Like, I'll look at a light pole in the distance, just a pole sticking out of the ground but in the dark, and for some reason it will incite animal fear in me if I look at it for a little bit too long. So right away I decided I wanted the king just terrifyingly tall and thin. And I knew that I never wanted him to show up entirely on screen because he's so large that no matter what place he's in, he is always taller. I also decided that it doesn't matter if the king has his own pallid mask or not because I would never be drawing whatever is under the cloak. I'd like to clarify, I don't find my drawings of the king disturbing, I actually find them quite silly because he's so squiggly. I'm saying if in real life I saw something maddeningly gigantic and thin just looming in the distance, not even moving, I would probably succumb to madness too. I chose simpler forms and leaned into cubism for Yellow John and even the king because it was appropriate for the time and also alluded itself nicely to their images being more mental and dreamlike. Weird fiction and surrealism actually had a bit of an impact on each other. I cannot wait to talk about that when we get into my designs for Carcosa in Season 6. In case you couldn't tell, this length of time after Season 2 is where the fixation evolved to hyperfixation. And you best buckle up because it's only getting better from here. Back to the humans, at the same time around the wager when I decided on their profiles, I was working on making Kayne's more Corvid-like, which I didn't realize it at the time but was actually super relevant for a couple of things. But again, I will not talk about it until we get to Da Capo and the manager. Larson was so fun because I designed him backwards, only drawing him for the first time around this time when I was developing everyone else's faces. Except the only reason I felt interested enough to draw him was that I decided Yellow would eventually get his body. And say it with me now, I gave him long hair. With narrative purpose. The idea with this silly little Yellow Larson hypothetical is that he would resent Larson's treatment and having a body altogether, so he would go through a cycle of shredding it out of spite and then realizing, wow, ouch, having a body and being a human hurts, so he goes and locks himself in a room and takes an 8-day long sensory overload nap. This is so exciting because I was able to recycle this design in canon for Lilith Larson in 58, which I was so happy about. Then I remembered Larson was a human man before he became the Outer God's favorite bitch, so I cut his hair and gave him his glasses back. As for the environments, on the official Malevolent merch site, Addison actually has a map, so that was helpful. It's also where I found the date for the establishment of Larson Mining Company. When it came to designing the environments, I actually have a lot of personal experience exploring and existing in both abandoned Old West mountain mining towns and southeastern hollers, so I just smacked the two of them together, slapped Larson's little $1 million log cabin in the middle of it, and buried it in a nice 5 feet of snow. A nice light winter for our struggling English friend. And I think that about does it. I might make some kind of comprehensive list of all the new scars Arthur got, but it's kind of pointless at this point. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to see more videos like this, consider liking and subscribing. I post one of these almost every month. Thank you so much to the Invictus server for supporting everything that I do. Thank you to Harlan for fostering such an amazing community. And thank you to Haunty for fixing my sheet music. Thank you to all my other friends I've made on the server. You know who you are. I'm working on your art trades, I'm sorry. And who's hyped for Series 2? Charlie, come back! And thank you so much to my friends and family who, in spite of all of this, have never told me to shut up. And as always, peak this sick organ solo.